I assume this is fairly controversial with some of the troops. What is the decision? What is the thinking behind this decision?
Right, this is part of just a bigger, broad push to, increase safety and the well-being of the Navy and the Marine Corps after a decade of war, and that's the way the leadership is really selling it. This is a way to keep the Marines and the Navy ready for deployment, even as the wars in Iraq have ended and the war in Iraq and Afghanistan prepares to wind down.
Nathan, when and how will these tests be conducted?
Right, we're still learning a little bit of the details, but sort of what we found out yesterday was that, for instance, on a ship, when some sailors show up for duty, they'll actually have to blow a breathalyzer test first thing, and other members of the crew could be selected at random for breathalyzer tests. The military services already do testing for illegal drugs, but this is going to be a new step, and no doubt for some people who are worried a little bit about, what happens if you were out steaming the night before. What happens if you come and you blow positive on the breathalyzer? This is certainly going to be a little bit of, it could be difficult.
Now, what about the Air Force and the Army? Do they have any similar tests, Nathan?
Right, we checked with them. Neither the Army nor the Air Force currently does anything like this. Of course, it's important to point out that troops in the field, in Iraq and Afghanistan, have been under what's called General Order Number 1. That means that they're not allowed to drink alcohol at all. So what we're talking about is what happens when you're back at home station, essentially. So, this is, one of the questions that was asked by reporters is this is going to be kind of an imposition after the wars are over of more of a kind of a garrison mentality or a rules culture after a decade of combat. And of course, the leadership has said, the troops have earned the right to blow off steam, but they want them to do it in a responsible fashion.
But just to be clear, the testing will only occur when they are actively on duty. Is that right, Nathan?
Right. They're not going to be going off post and making people do breathalyzer tests or anything like that. But what they've said, or what the leadership has said, is that when they look at a lot of the other problems that they've had with personnel, whether it could be domestic abuse, whether it's suicide, they very often find that alcohol has been a factor in a lot of these problems. So this is something that they really want to reinforce, that they want people to be able to drink if they're allowed to, that is if they're of age, but do it in a responsible fashion.
I assume post-traumatic stress syndrome must sort of play into some of the concerns that perhaps people will be drinking more or are drinking more to simply help cope.
Right. I mean, the Army, for instance, which you mentioned, there's much more mindfulness about the problems of post-traumatic stress, traumatic brain injury. There's just a lot more attention to screening and things like that. And the Army was very alarmed by a rise in suicide starting in around 2005. So, all the services have taken different approaches to try to, find ways to take better care of the force. Again, after this decade of prolonged combat and repeat rotations.
And very quickly, what will the punishments be if they are caught? I assume it's not just that they're drinking at all, but there has to be a certain blood alcohol content level in their blood. Is that right?
Right. I mean, they're talking about basically this is kind of like it's not a legal tool. It's not something that would necessarily go on your record. It's just a way of screening people as a preventative tool to find out, if they're on duty, whether they should be not on duty, and they could be taken off duty, and I'm sure their chain of command gets informed. But it's not one of these things that becomes a punitive tool. At least that's the way it's been characterized to us.